Have you ever sat
Something's not
next to
wrong
a
with that.
stranger on a flight, only to
Are you
realize
sure
that
it's
meeting them
safe?
would change your life
It's
forever?
so
A
loud.
fallen pilot haunted by guilt, a boy clutching a worn toy jet, and a woman who thought compassion had no place at 30,000 feet, all bound together by fate, forgiveness, and the sky itself. Before we go on, allow me to wish you peace and good health. Tell me, from which country and at what time are you watching this story? When Eli Turner buckled his son's seatbelt in 12 Farads, he didn't expect the flight to remind him of everything he'd lost and everything he still hadn't forgiven himself for. The cabin smelled faintly of leather and citrus disinfectant, a scent that belonged to people who flew often. Eli didn't. He'd saved miles from a mechanic's paycheck and accepted a veteran's courtesy upgrade mostly so little Caleb could see the clouds up close. The boy's small fingers clutched a scratched F-22 model, its paint worn away like a secret whispered too many times. Eli's hands bore the marks of years under car hoods, tiny cuts, a faint oil sheen that no soap could ever quite erase. He straightened the boy's jacket, smiling when the zipper caught halfway. Around them, business travelers arranged laptops and sighed about deadlines. Caleb pressed his face to the oval window, breath fogging the glass. "Do they let kids fly the plane if they ask nice?" he asked. Eli chuckled softly, a sound that didn't reach his tired eyes. Across the aisle, perfume arrived before the woman did. Avery Langford, mid-30s, immaculate hair, phone already in hand, slid into 12E like she was taking possession of property. Her manicured nails tapped the armrest while she murmured into her headset, voice low and crisp.
"Yes, tell procurement the new avionics prototypes ship Friday."
And remind them we don't pay for delays. Each word cut through the gentle murmur of passengers. The flight attendant appeared with that professional Smile Airlines train-like choreography. "Can I get you anything before takeoff, ma'am?" Avery accepted sparkling water in glass. When the attendant turned toward Eli, her smile flickered, half a beat shorter. "Coffee?" she offered, tone polite but cautious. "Sure thing. Black's fine," he said. The cup came back in paper, not glass. Avery's eyes drifted toward his frayed collar, the faint grease smudge near the cuff. She shifted slightly, as if distance itself could preserve comfort. Into her phone she murmured, "They really should have separate sections." She didn't whisper it enough. Eli heard, but didn't look her way. Years had taught him that silence was sometimes the last intact form of dignity. Caleb began flying his toy gently in slow loops. The whooshing noises were barely a hum, but Avery's shoulders tightened anyway. "Honey, maybe play something quieter," she said without looking. Eli reached over, resting a steady hand on his son's arm. "Let's keep the engines on idle for now, champ." The boy nodded, obedient but disappointed. The model jet came to rest in his lap, a chipped reminder of dreams too expensive for their reality. Outside the window, sunlight glanced off the wing. Eli remembered a time when that shimmer meant everything, when he'd worn a flight suit instead of faded denim, when his name, call sign, and purpose had all fit neatly into a single patch. Now it was just a memory that ached like an old injury in bad weather. He touched the steel bracelet on his wrist, engraved with a name and number, Hawk 7. Most days he forgot it was there. On days like this, it remembered him. Avery's conversation filled the quiet. "We deliver tech, not babysit pilots. If they can't follow instructions, that's not our fault." She laughed lightly, a practice sound. Caleb looked up, puzzled. "Dad? She builds planes too?" Eli hesitated. "Something like that." He tried to smile, but the edge of it broke before reaching his eyes. The intercom crackled. "Folks, we've been cleared for departure." Engines rumbled alive beneath their feet, a low vibration that stirred something deep in Eli's chest. The aircraft began to taxi, wheels bumping over seams of runway. Caleb gripped his father's hand. "It's loud," he shouted, half excited, half afraid. "That's how you know it's real," Eli said, voice steady. As the 737 tilted upward, the city shrank into a patchwork of highways and rooftops. Clouds opened like gates, swallowing sunlight. Eli's stomach rose with the climb. Muscle memory whispered instructions he no longer needed. Airspeed, angle, thrust, old habits, buried deep, resurfaced, uninvited. He forced himself to breathe. Beside him, Caleb laughed in wonder. "We're flying!" He smiled at his son's joy, letting it wash away the static of anxiety. The boy deserved the sky unburdened by ghosts. Eli leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, hearing not the engines but echoes of another cockpit, another life. The steady voice of Nora, his late wife, calling targets, teasing him over the radio. He hadn't heard that voice in years, yet the memory came sharp and kind at once. When he opened his eyes again, Avery was typing on her tablet, face haloed in screen light. She looked powerful, untouched by turbulence or empathy. The contrast made Eli aware of every frayed thread on his jacket, every reminder of how far he'd fallen. But then Caleb tugged his sleeve. "Dad, look." The boy pointed through the cloud break where sunlight spilled in golden rivers. For a heartbeat, it felt like forgiveness had shape and color. The plane steadied above the clouds, and the world outside turned into soft white plains. Caleb's small reflection blinked back at him from the window. He whispered, "It looks like snow, Dad." Eli nodded, only quieter. The boy smiled, satisfied with that answer, and leaned his head against his father's arm. Across the aisle, Avery sighed when the Wi-Fi signal flickered. She restarted her call, her tone clipped, irritated. "No, the pilots don't need more training. They need better hardware. I told you, the problem's human error." Her voice carried the conviction of someone who had never once trusted anything she couldn't control. Eli turned his gaze toward the seat pocket in front of him. Safety card, magazine, sickness bag. He'd helped design emergency protocols for this exact aircraft once, before contracts ended and life narrowed to fixing sedans at Precision Auto. That job had kept rent paid and Caleb fed. It was enough, most days. But enough still left space for ghosts. The flight attendant returned with a warm towel. Avery accepted hers gracefully, dabbing her wrists. When she offered one to Eli, her smile faltered a fraction, unsure if he fit the part of business class. He took it anyway, wiping his hands, thanking her with quiet courtesy. The smallest acts of respect mattered most to the people who seldom received them. Caleb stirred again. "Dad, do you think Mom can see us from up here?" His voice came soft as breath. Eli's chest tightened. "Yeah, buddy," he said after a pause. "That's how love works. It sees farther than the sky." The words surprised even him. They felt true, and that truth hurt in the best possible way. Avery's attention flicked sideways, curiosity tempered with judgment. Her eyes lingered on the steel band around his wrist. She recognized military engraving when she saw it, but she said nothing. Maybe she thought it was decorative. Maybe she didn't care enough to ask. Eli preferred it that way. The flight leveled into cruise, a steady hum filling the cabin. Coffee scents, recycled air, the occasional clink of glassware, small symphony of travel that used to thrill him. Now it only reminded him of altitude he could never reclaim. Caleb's toy jet rested on the tray table, its nose pointed toward the clouds as if still believing it could fly. He watched his son's eyelids flutter, sleep tugging at him, the toy still gripped in his small hand. The world softened around them. Eli looked out the window again, and somewhere between the clouds and his reflection, he caught a glimpse of the man he used to be: confident, unbreakable, unstoppable, the kind of man who could promise safety and mean it. A sudden announcement broke the stillness. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be starting our descent shortly due to minor maintenance concerns. Nothing to worry about." The pilot's voice was calm, but Eli's trained ear caught something tight underneath, the kind of tone men used when their hands were busy hiding fear. He said nothing. Old instincts told him to observe, not alarm. The engines adjusted pitch. The air changed texture. Caleb stirred in his sleep, unaware. Avery, however, felt the shift. Her knuckles whitened around her tablet. "What's happening?" she whispered, not to anyone in particular. Eli glanced at her. "Probably routine," he said, though his eyes stayed on the overhead lights, counting seconds between hums. He could almost hear the pilot's corrections: rudder, trim, airflow. Something wasn't right, but he knew they'd make it. Pilots always did, until the day they didn't. When the intercom clicked off, silence filled the cabin, heavy and waiting. The sound of air rushing past the fuselage was louder now. Avery tapped her armrest nervously. And for the first time since boarding, she wasn't thinking about spreadsheets or control. She was just another human being, 30,000 feet above everything that mattered. Eli reached for the armrest between them, not to comfort, but to steady himself. The gesture, small and unspoken, carried more grace than any sermon. He'd spent years convincing himself that his worth had fallen with his career. Yet sitting there, his child asleep, a stranger's fear beside him, he realized dignity wasn't altitude. It was endurance. Outside, light broke through cloud layers in long, trembling rays. Caleb's toy jet gleamed under the cabin glow. Its scratched wings catching fire from the Sunday Eli smiled faintly. He could almost hear Nora again, laughing through static. "You were born for the sky, Eli. Just don't forget to land sometimes." The landing gear dropped with a mechanical groan, jostling Avery's glass. Her breath hitched. Eli placed a calm hand over his son's shoulder. The boy didn't wake. The plane tilted gently into its descent. As the Texas plains came into view, patches of gold and rust stretching forever, Eli felt an ache that wasn't pain so much as memory knocking from inside. He didn't know yet that the ground waiting below held something more than tarmac and heat haze. It held the part of him he'd left behind. As the engines deepened to their landing pitch, Caleb whispered in his sleep, "Someday I'll fly like you, Dad." Eli closed his eyes. He hadn't heard those words in years. The plane glided steady through a corridor of light, clouds like white rivers flowing beneath the wings. Somewhere behind the hum of engines, a faint tremor passed through the fuselage, so soft most passengers would never notice. But Eli Turner did. He'd been inside too many aircraft not to hear when something spoke in metal. Caleb pressed his small face against the window again, his reflection framed in sky.
"Dad,"
he said, voice full of awe.
"we're higher than birds."
"Much higher," Eli replied softly. "But birds still know where they're going." A few rows away, Avery Langford adjusted her seat, tapping on her tablet. Her heels were neatly crossed, posture perfect, as if turbulence itself would think twice before disturbing her. "If they delay my next connection, someone's getting fired," she murmured into her phone. The woman's tone carried the clipped confidence of people used to winning arguments they didn't even have to start. Eli turned his gaze away. The quiet dignity of patience had become his habit. It was easier to absorb contempt than to fight it. Caleb fidgeted, his toy F-22 weaving small loops in the air above his lap. "Remember when you said Mom helped you fly?" the boy asked. "Yeah, I remember," Eli said, his voice thinner than he intended. "She was the best co-pilot there ever was." Caleb's eyes brightened.
"Did she ever get scared?"
Eli smiled, just a shadow of it. "Only when I tried to make her breakfast." Caleb giggled, then leaned back into his father's arm. The sound warmed something deep in Eli, the kind of warmth that used to come from sunlight over a runway or the radio chatter of his old squadron. It had been years since he'd let himself imagine flight without the crash that followed. Avery's voice cut through his thoughts. "We're shipping to Nellis, right? The Air Force loves to waste money." She laughed at her own remark. The man across the aisle chuckled obligingly. Eli didn't. He looked instead at the small head resting against his shoulder. He'd learned not to defend himself to strangers. People saw the worn jacket, the discount sneakers, the tired eyes, and decided what kind of man he must be. It was easier to let them be wrong than to explain how much right had already cost him. The intercom crackled again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're passing 33,000 feet. Smooth air ahead." The captain's voice was confident, practiced. But Eli caught the faint delay before he spoke again, like someone double-checking a readout before reassuring the cabin. Years of habit tuned him to hesitation the way a sailor knows wind. He looked down the aisle, then out toward the wing, perfectly normal. Yet something in the vibration pattern told a different story, tiny rhythm changes that hinted at pressure differentials. Nothing dangerous, probably. Still, his mind began its old dance. If hydraulic pressure dropped, He stopped himself. "You weren't a pilot anymore, Eli. You were a passenger." Caleb tugged on his sleeve. "Can we see Mom's stars when it gets dark?" Eli nodded. "If we stay above the clouds, we might." The boy smiled, the kind of innocent smile that could rebuild whole worlds. Eli brushed a hand through his son's hair, the gesture as automatic as breathing. The flight attendant passed with a tray. "Anything else for you, sir?" she asked Eli. Her voice held a tone softer than before, maybe guilt, maybe simple politeness. "We're fine, thank you," he said, then added, "He likes the juice with the orange straw, if you have one." She smiled, relieved to have something kind to do, and returned moments later with exactly that. Avery glanced over her tablet, watching the exchange like a study in anthropology.
You travel often?
She asked, voice polite in theory, not in spirit. Not much, Eli replied. Used to. Business or leisure? She pressed. Neither, he said simply. Duty. Embry. Something flickered in her expression, recognition. Maybe confusion, but she let it drop. The conversation with her phone resumed almost immediately. The engines purred low. The sunlight shifted. The plane sliced through a layer of thin mist, scattering beams across the cabin. In that diffused glow, Eli thought he saw Nora's reflection beside his own, her ghost framed, in vapor and glass. For a moment, he almost reached for her hand. He blinked, and the light was gone. Only Caleb remained, holding his toy jet and whispering sound effects under his breath, careful not to disturb anyone. Eli leaned closer.
You make a good pilot, buddy,
Caleb grinned. Then I'll take you flying when I grow up. I'd like that, Eli said, the words catching on something that felt like hope. Outside, the clouds stretched forever, and the steady drone of engines felt like a lullaby. For the first time in a long while, Eli allowed himself to believe they were safe. He didn't know yet that safety was only a pause between storm. The seatbelt sign blinked on again with a soft chime. A murmur rolled through the cabin. The pilot's voice returned, even and calm. Folks, just a brief note. Some unexpected crosswinds ahead. Nothing serious. Please remain seated for a bit. Avery exhaled sharply, closing her tablet. Crosswinds, she muttered, as if the word itself were an inconvenience invented just to disrupt her plans. She looked toward Eli, expecting agreement, but found him steady and still, his hand loosely covering his son's. There was something in that composure she couldn't name, something that felt out of place in a man wearing second-hand denim. The plane dipped slightly. Coffee rippled in plastic cups. Caleb stirred awake, blinking. Dad? It's just the air saying hello, Eli said with a half-smile. She gets moody sometimes. Caleb giggled, pressing his forehead to the window. Can we see the ground? Not yet. We're still in the clouds. Outside, vapor swirled thick, painting the windows with slow-moving gray. Lightning flashed, somewhere distant, a soft flicker, like a heartbeat too far away to fear. Eli's hand tightened around the armrest, not from panic, but memory. He could still feel the hum of flight controls, the tremor in his bones when weather turned. Avery fidgeted, trying to distract herself. You used to fly? She asked, voice thin but genuine for once. Yeah, Eli said quietly. Long time ago. For the Air Force? He nodded. She hesitated. Then why? Things change, he interrupted gently, not unkindly. Sometimes they have to. The plane jolted, sudden and sharp. Gasps filled the cabin. The overhead compartments rattled. A baby cried somewhere near the back. Avery's nails dug into her armrest. They said it was nothing, she whispered. Eli's voice came calm, almost measured. It's fine. They're just correcting pitch. Happens all the time. He turned toward Caleb, who had gone still, wide-eyed. Look at me, buddy. We're okay. The boy nodded, trusting him completely. That trust hit Eli harder than the turbulence. Moments later, the aircraft steadied again. The engines returned to their smooth hum, and conversation slowly resumed. The captain's voice followed. Sorry about that, folks. Just a pocket of rough air. Everything's normal. Avery exhaled. Her face was pale but composed. You sounded sure, she said, studying Eli. Habit, he replied. You don't forget how to listen to a plane. She looked at him differently now, not as a man out of place, but as someone who'd once belonged to the sky itself. Something in her expression softened. My company builds parts for aircraft, she said after a pause. We think we know them, but I guess we only touch their bones, not their hearts. Eli smiled faintly. Planes have hearts? Apparently, she murmured. Caleb tugged his father's sleeve. Dad, when the plane shakes, do the pilots get scared too? Sometimes, Eli said, but they don't stop flying. The boy nodded solemnly, like he'd been told a secret worth keeping. Avery leaned back, eyes unfocused, her reflection faint in the dimmed window light. I've never thought about fear from their side, she said quietly. Eli didn't answer. He didn't need to. Minutes passed. The clouds began to thin, revealing streaks of blue and the shimmer of distant land. Sunlight slid across the cabin, soft as forgiveness. Avery turned her head, catching the glow on her hands. She looked at the old steel bracelet on Eli's wrist, Hawk. 7 letters faded from years of wear. "What's that mean?" she asked. He glanced at it, thumb brushing the engraving. "A call sign. A reminder." "Of what?" "That I came back." The answer lingered between them. Quiet and heavy. The boy had fallen asleep again, head resting against his father's side, the toy jet still in his grasp. Outside, the light shifted toward gold. The plane began its slow descent, engines whispering a different kind of sound, less power, more grace. Eli's thoughts drifted somewhere between the clouds and the earth, waiting below. For years he'd believed he'd lost his place in the world the day he stepped out of the cockpit. But sitting there, with his son asleep and a stranger watching him with something like respect, he realized the truth wasn't loss. It was landing. The seatbelt sign stayed on, but the air felt calmer now. People relaxed. Flight attendants resumed quiet service. A cart rolled softly down the aisle, the smell of reheated coffee mingling with citrus-scented air. Avery looked toward him one more time. "You're good with turbulence," she said. Eli smiled, eyes still on the window. "After a while, you learn it's just air trying to find balance." She didn't reply, but her gaze lingered as the clouds parted fully and Texas sunlight spilled through, filling every empty space between them. As the wheels touched ground with a soft, trembling sigh, no one cheered. But in that silence, Eli felt something shift, an old promise breathing again, faint but alive. He reached down, adjusted the steel bracelet on his wrist, and whispered a name only the sky could hear. The captain's voice came through. "Welcome to Abilene. Local time is 5:40, 2 p.m. And in that moment, as the engines wound down and the boy in 12 Farads dreamed on, Eli Turner had no idea that his next flight would begin right here on the ground. The heat in Abilene hit like an old handshake firm, uninvited, familiar. The terminal's glass walls shimmered with late afternoon light as Eli guided Caleb through the narrow walkway. The boy's hand was sticky from orange juice, his toy jet tucked under one arm like cargo. Outside, the runway stretched endless and sun-baked. F-22 silhouettes waited in the distance, their wings glinting like knives left out in the Texas Sunday. Caleb squinted. "Dad, are those yours?" "Used to be," Eli said. His voice was steady, but his chest tightened the way it always did when the air smelled faintly of jet fuel and dust. Avery Langford followed a few steps behind, her phone already buzzing back to life. "Tell the team I'll be at DS in 20, she said briskly into the receiver. "No, I don't care if they're still on base time. They'll adjust." She caught Eli's eye briefly and gave a polite nod, the kind people use to close unfinished stories. He nodded back. They parted ways near the terminal doors, her to a waiting car with tinted windows, him to the pickup zone where an old Ford idled, its paint faded and reliable. A man in a veteran's cap leaned out the driver's window. "You're late, Turner," he called, grinning. "Didn't think you'd trade engines for passengers." Eli smiled faintly. "Didn't think I'd be this slow to deplane either." The driver, Sergeant Brooks, was a fellow mechanic from the base, retired now but still wearing his rank like a badge stitched into his soul. "Got room for the kiddo and the luggage?" "Just this," Eli said, patting Caleb's backpack. "We travel light." The truck rumbled through Abilene's quiet streets. Storefronts rolled by barbershops, diners with peeling paint, an old radio tower. Caleb watched everything like it was the first chapter of a new adventure. "Is this where you flew, Dad?" "Yeah," Eli said. "Home of the Hawks," Brooks chuckled from the driver's seat. "Home of the memories, too. Some good, some you leave where they fell." They stopped at a small diner near the edge of town, the Silver Run. A sign buzzed faintly above the door, its neon "Eat" flickering in and out of life. The place smelled of coffee and frying onions, the kind of scent that made strangers talk softer. Inside, ceiling fans spun lazy circles. A waitress in her 60s smiled at Caleb. "Aren't you a little pilot?" she said, setting down menus. "What'll it be, sugar?" "Grilled cheese," Caleb said proudly. "Good choice. That's the captain's favorite," she winked. Eli ordered coffee. Brooks took a burger, and silence settled over the booth for a while. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, just full of the things they didn't need to say out loud. On the wall behind them hung photographs of Dias pilots. All smiles and medals, frozen mid-handshake. Eli's face was among them. Younger, brighter, untouched by consequence. Brooks caught him looking. "You could have been running squadrons by now." "Could have," Eli said. He traced a finger over the coffee mug rim. "But could have doesn't raise a boy." Caleb swung his legs under the table, humming the theme from his favorite cartoon. The sound was light and perfect. It made Brooks smile. "He's got your eyes." Eli nodded. "And his mother's courage?" The waitress returned, setting down their plates. "Refill on coffee?" she asked. "Please," Eli said. As she poured, he caught sight of the day's newspaper by the register. The headline read, "Defense Tech Firm Expands Contract at Dias Air Base." The photo beneath showed a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Avery Langford in the center, sharp smile, polished suit, hand on the shoulder of Colonel Holt, Eli's former commanding officer. He stared a moment too long. Brooks followed his gaze. "That the woman from the plane?" "Yeah," Eli said. "She trouble?" "Not for me," he answered. "But trouble usually starts that way somewhere else." Caleb bit into his sandwich. "Dad, what's Dias?" "It's where people fly fast and try to come home faster," Eli said gently. "Are we going there?" Eli hesitated. "Not today." But even as he said it, he knew they would. The past had a way of circling back, like aircraft waiting for clearance they never got. After lunch, Brooks dropped them at a small motel near the edge of town. The neon sign blinked VAC NCY, the missing letter humming faintly. Caleb jumped onto the bed, laughing. Eli smiled despite himself. He unpacked one small duffel spare clothes, a photo of Nora, and an envelope stamped Dias AFB, personnel record, inactive. He opened it, fingers trembling slightly. Inside lay a copy of his old flight clearance and a letter he'd never read past the first line. "Your conduct during the incident remains under review." He folded it shut, slid it back. Some ghosts didn't need reading twice. As dusk settled, Eli stepped outside the motel room. The sky stretched wide, fading from gold to bruised blue. Somewhere in the distance, engines roared, a training flight returning to base. He recognized the sound instantly. F-22 Raptors, his old squadron, the Hawks, the same rhythm, the same thunder. He could almost name the pilot by the tone of the afterburners. Caleb ran out barefoot, pointing upward. "Dad, look, they're dancing." Eli watched the jets cross paths, one banking hard into a slow roll. "Yeah," he whispered. "They always did." A voice came from behind. "Still know their names?" Eli turned. Colonel Holt stood by the fence line, uniform crisp, eyes steady. "Sir," Eli said, surprised. "Didn't think you'd ever come back," Holt replied. "People usually don't unless they're looking for something." Eli met his gaze. "Maybe I am." Holt nodded slowly, unreadable. "Then you might find more than you bargained for." The colonel's shadow stretched long across the gravel as the sound of jet engines faded into the dark. The evening air smelled of dust and exhaust, the kind that clung to your clothes and followed you into your dreams. Colonel Holt's boots crunched on the gravel as he came closer, his expression somewhere between welcome and warning. "I saw your name pop up at the gate," Holt said. "Didn't believe it at first. Turner back in Abilene after all these years." Eli nodded. "Just visiting. My boy wanted to see where the Hawks used to fly." Holt's eyes shifted toward the motel window, where Caleb's silhouette danced against the curtain. "That him? Looks like he's got the same spark you did." Eli smiled faintly. "He's got a better one. Doesn't come with the crash." Holt exhaled, a sound half sigh, half memory. "We all have crashes, Turner. Some of us just walk away from them better than others." They stood quiet for a moment. Crickets started their chorus in the dry grass. Down the road, headlights passed, throwing streaks of gold across the colonel's uniform. "You keeping busy?" Holt asked finally. "Garage in Austin," Eli said. "Keeps the lights on." "Oh, still hearing engines in your sleep?" Eli chuckled softly. "Some nights, yeah." Holt folded his arms. "Langford's team's on base tomorrow. Big demonstration. Civilian contractors showing off what they think pilots need." Eli's jaw tightened. "She's got Holt's attention, huh?" "She's got the Pentagon's," Holt replied. Whole program depends on it. Thought you should know your name came up in the pre-brief. They're looking at old test flight data from your Hawk run. M? Eli looked at him, caught between pride and unease. Still digging through that? History doesn't stay buried long around here, Holt said, especially when it comes with controversy. The colonel turned to go but paused. You planning on sticking around? For a bit, Eli said. The kid likes the sky here. Holt nodded once. Then take a drive by the north fence tomorrow. Might find something waiting for you. When he left, the night seemed bigger. The airbase lights blinked in the distance like slow heartbeats. Inside the motel, Caleb was already asleep, the toy jet tucked under his arm. Eli sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the thin curtains swaying in the fan's breeze. He thought of Holt's words, something waiting for you. He wasn't sure if it was a warning or an invitation. He opened the drawer, pulled out Nora's photograph, its edges soft from years of travel. She was laughing, wind whipping her hair across her face, her flight suit half-zipped, sun catching her badge. The picture had been taken the week before the accident. He touched the frame with a thumb roughened by time. I told you I wouldn't come back, he murmured. Guess I lied. Outside, the rumble of a late-night convoy rolled past military trucks heading toward the base. The sound hit something deep inside him, a pulse he couldn't quiet. He stepped out again, letting the screen door creak shut behind him. A cool breeze swept the lot. Across the road, the diner's neon "Eat" flickered weakly against the dark. A couple of men sat on its porch, sipping coffee, talking low. Eli leaned against the truck and looked up. The stars over Texas stretched forever, the Milky Way cutting through the sky like a wound that never closed. He remembered what Holt had said. They're looking at your flight data. His hands twitched, the old reflex of gripping a control stick. He'd told himself he'd buried that part of his life for Caleb's sake, but the truth was more selfish. He'd been afraid to know whether he could still feel the sky without breaking. A door closed softly behind him. Avery Langford stepped out from the diner across the road, her silhouette clear in the neon light. She was alone now. No phone, no assistance. She spotted him and hesitated before crossing the street. I thought that was you, she said. Her tone wasn't sharp this time, just cautious, curious. Colonel Holt mentioned you'd come back. Eli didn't move. Didn't plan on being part of any demonstrations. Neither did I, she said. But here we are. She came closer, her heels crunching on gravel. You were with the Hawks, weren't you? I saw your name in the test reports. Eli nodded. Long time ago. You flew the same prototype that... She stopped herself. The one that crashed and flew. He met her eyes evenly. Yeah, the one that killed my wife. The words hung heavy between them. Avery looked down, her confidence unraveling for the first time. I'm sorry. I didn't know. Most people don't, Eli said quietly. They just see numbers and reports. Avery folded her arms, searching for something to say. Tomorrow's demo, it's based on the same data from that incident. The improvements, the fail-safes, all of it came from what you two did. I thought you might want to know that. Oh, Eli stared past her, toward the base lights blinking faintly on the horizon. Doesn't bring her back, he said. No, she replied. But maybe it means her work mattered. He didn't answer. The night wind lifted the dust around their feet, swirling in small circles before falling still again. Avery took a step back. You should come tomorrow. The colonel's expecting you anyway. Eli shook his head. I've had enough of watching from the ground. Then maybe that's the problem, she said softly. Maybe you're not supposed to. She turned and walked away, the sound of her footsteps fading into the dark. Eli stayed by the truck, eyes fixed on the horizon where the airbase lights flickered like distant stars. For the first time in years, he felt the sky calling not as an escape, but as a reckoning. He looked down at the steel bracelet on his wrist, the one engraved Hawk 7, and whispered into the night, maybe it's time to answer. Oh, somewhere far above, an unseen jet thundered across the clouds, its sound rolling like distant applause. Morning came soft and golden, spreading across the Texas plains like a slow breath. From the motel window, Eli watched the first F-22 slice through the sunrise, its vapor trail carving a white line straight into memory. Caleb pressed his nose to the glass, eyes wide. They're flying, Dad. They're really flying. Eli smiled, the kind of smile that hurt a little. Yeah, They are. And at the diner across the road, coffee steamed in paper cups. Avery Langford was already there, crisp blouse, hair pinned neat, her tablet glowing with schedules. "You showed up," she said as Eli walked in with Caleb. "Just breakfast," he said. "The kid likes pancakes." Her mouth curved into something almost kind. Convenient timing. The demonstration starts in an hour. The radio behind the counter murmured with news something about defense budgets, veteran programs. Eli half listened while Caleb drowned his pancakes in syrup. Avery was on her third cup of coffee before she looked up. "Colonel Holt asked if you'd join us on base." "I'm not cleared for that anymore," Eli said. "He says you're still on the visitor list. Guess some ghosts never get deleted." She meant it as a joke, but the words landed deeper. Ghosts had been his only company for years. They drove together toward Dyess Air Force Base, the boy chattering in the back seat about airplanes and radio towers. The closer they came, the louder the memories grew, boots on concrete, radio chatter, laughter echoing in hangars. The main gate rose ahead, the American flag fluttering against the pale blue sky. The guard checked IDs, saluted Holt's name on the clearance, and waved them through. Inside, hangars lined the runway like sleeping giants. Men and women in flight suits moved with that familiar precision, every gesture part of an unspoken language Eli once spoke fluently. Colonel Holt met them by a row of aircraft, clipboard in hand. "Turner," he said, "appreciate you coming." "Didn't think I had a choice," Eli replied. Holt's mouth twitched. "You never did." He looked down at Caleb. "So, this is the new pilot?" Caleb straightened proudly. "I'm gonna fly faster than anyone." Holt laughed, genuine warmth cutting through the military stiffness. "I believe you will." Technicians moved around them, setting up equipment. Avery stood beside a silver-gray prototype, sleek and unfamiliar. "This model carries her fingerprints," she said quietly, meaning Nora. "The stabilizer redesigned, the fail-safe routines, it's all hers." Eli's throat tightened. "You rebuilt what she died testing." "We perfected it," Avery said. "Because of her, M." He walked closer, fingertips brushing the cool metal fuselage. The scent of aviation fuel hit him like a wave. His reflection stared back, older, quieter, but still the man who once trusted his life to these machines. Holt's voice cut through the hum. "We'll begin the simulation soon. Thought you might want front row seats." Eli hesitated. "I'm fine right here." "Suit yourself," Holt said, walking off toward the control tower. The demo started with the low roar of engines. Two F-22 seconds taxied out, gleaming under the noon Sunday. The ground shook lightly. Caleb covered his ears, but grinned wide. Avery stood next to Eli, wind tugging at her jacket. "The right one's autonomous, assisted flight," she shouted over the noise. "The system your wife designed." The jets accelerated, slicing through the runway, lifting into the bright air. Eli's heart climbed with them. For a few minutes, the sky was pure motion rolls, dives, tight formations. He could almost feel the stick in his hands again. Then, one jet dipped too sharp. The crowd gasped. Smoke curled briefly before stabilizers corrected. The aircraft righted itself flawlessly, gliding back into formation. Applause rippled through the spectators. Avery exhaled. Failsafe kicked in. Her code worked. Eli swallowed hard. She would have smiled at that. Caleb tugged his sleeve. "Dad, look!" Across the tarmac, the pilots climbed out, removing helmets. One of them spotted Eli and froze. Then, with slow, deliberate movement, he raised his hand in salute. Eli blinked, unsure. The pilot, Major Laird, had flown under his command once. That salute wasn't casual. It was recognition, gratitude. Eli's body reacted before his mind caught up. His hand rose automatically, returning the gesture. Sunlight flashed off his bracelet. Hawk 7. The crowd turned, murmuring. Holt stepped forward from the tower's shadow, his voice steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, the man standing there helped write the manual every one of us flies by. Welcome home, Captain Turner." The words landed like thunder. For years, he'd been just a man fixing cars. Now, the base itself seemed to remember him. Avery looked at him, her eyes wide. Caleb's small hand slipped into his. "They're saluting you, Dad." Eli couldn't speak. The roar of the engines built again, echoing in his chest like a heartbeat he thought he'd lost forever. The air stood still after the applause. as if the whole base had paused to breathe. The pilots lowered their salutes, but their eyes stayed locked on Eli. In that gaze, he saw pieces of his past, the camaraderie, the trust, the code that said you never left anyone behind. Colonel Holt came closer, a small smile tugging at his weathered face. "Didn't think you'd ever see that again, did you?" Eli shook his head slowly. "Not like this." Holt clapped him on the shoulder. "You earned every bit of it. Some honors take longer to come home." Caleb was bouncing at his side, his excitement bubbling over. "Dad, they saluted you, like in the movies. Can I be a pilot too?" Eli laughed, though his voice caught in his throat.
You already are, kid. You just fly lower for now.
Avery watched quietly, arms crossed, not defensive this time, but thoughtful. She stepped closer. "I didn't realize who you were," she said. "When we met on that plane, I only saw what you'd lost, not what you'd done." Eli turned to her. "Most people don't see past the dirt under the nails." "Then that's my failure," she admitted softly. "I've spent years building machines and contracts, forgetting they carry lives. Seeing you here, it changes things." The sun had shifted west, painting the hangars in amber light. A group of young cadets gathered nearby, whispering, pointing toward Eli, like he was a living legend. Holt gestured toward them. "They've studied your missions, you know. The Hawk Run, the Reaper Roll. You taught them how to survive up there." Eli's throat tightened again. "I just did my job," Holt nodded. "And that's what makes it worth remembering." The cadets approached, uncertain at first. One, a tall woman with her helmet tucked under her arm, spoke up. "Sir, it's an honor to meet you. The maneuver you developed saved my instructor's life last year." Eli blinked. "She's okay?" "Yes, sir. Because of you." He looked at her. At all of them faces, young and bright, filled with the same hunger for the sky he once had. "Then it wasn't for nothing," he said quietly. The crowd began to disperse, but Avery lingered beside him. "Colonel Holt mentioned you never filed for reinstatement," she said. "Wasn't sure I'd be allowed." "There's a civilian program," she said. "Advisory work? You could teach tactics, consult on flight systems. The base could use a voice that's actually been in the cockpit." Eli hesitated. "I'm no teacher." Avery smiled. "You just taught everyone out here what humility looks like. That counts." Caleb tugged his sleeve again. "Dad, can we see the inside of the plane?" Holt overheard. "I think that can be arranged." He signaled to one of the pilots, who grinned and waved them over. The latter clanged softly against the fuselage as Eli lifted Caleb up. The boy climbed eagerly, his small hands gripping metal steps. When he reached the cockpit, his voice dropped to a whisper. "It's like it's waiting for you, Dad." Eli climbed halfway, resting his hand on the canopy frame. "Maybe it's waiting for both of us," he said. For a long moment, he just stood there halfway between earth and sky, between what was lost and what remained. He wasn't a captain anymore, or a broken man trying to disappear. He was just Eli Turner, father, mechanic, pilot, survivor finally steady again. Caleb turned the small control stick, giggling. "I'm flying, Dad." Eli's heart lifted with him. "Yeah, buddy," he said. "You sure are." Avery watched from below, a faint smile on her face. Holt stood beside her, arms folded.
He's got that look again,
the colonel said. "The one pilots get before takeoff?" "No," Holt said softly. "The one they get when they remember why they landed. M." As the sun dipped behind the hangars, the base quieted, leaving only the hum of engines cooling and the cry of distant birds. Eli climbed down, scooped Caleb into his arms, and looked once more at the sky glowing red with sunset. "Come on, kid," he said. "Let's go home." They walked across the tarmac, hand in hand, the shadow of the F-22 stretching long behind them like a memory following, not haunting. And somewhere in that silence, Eli finally felt what he hadn't in years: peace. The morning after the salute, the motel room was quiet except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Eli sat on the edge of the bed, watching Caleb sleep with his toy jet clutched tightly in one hand. The boy murmured something about flying fast, and Eli smiled faintly, tracing the embossed letters on his bracelet Hawk 7. He hadn't felt this kind of calm in years. Yesterday's salute had changed something deep inside him. It hadn't erased the past, but it had softened. It turned pain into pride. At the Silver Run Diner, the waitress recognized them instantly. Back again, sugar? She said, pouring his coffee. Eli nodded. Guess we're becoming regulars. The bell jingled behind him. Avery Langford walked in, her sharp corporate air replaced by something gentler. Morning, she said, sliding into the booth across from him. You looked different yesterday. Oh, different how? Like a man who remembered why he mattered. She pushed a folder toward him. Inside, official paperwork from Dias Air Base gleamed under the diner's light consultant offer, clearance terms, and pay grade. They want you to train new recruits, Avery said. You don't have to fly, just teach. Eli studied it quietly. I thought my chapter with the Air Force ended. Maybe, she said softly. But stories like yours deserve an epilogue. Caleb returned from the jukebox, excited. Dad, I picked a flying song. The diner filled with an old country tune about sky and redemption. Eli chuckled. Good choice, Captain. Avery smiled. You should listen to him more often. Eli looked at her, then at the boy dancing to the song. Yeah, he said. I think I will. The next afternoon, the sky over Abilene opened wide and blue. The air show was in full swing, flags fluttering, the smell of popcorn and fuel mixing together. Caleb's hand gripped Eli's as jets thundered overhead, leaving white trails across the Sunday. Look, Dad, they're doing loops. Eli smiled, heart pounding. That's called a roll, buddy. Takes guts to fly like that. Colonel Holt appeared beside them, hat tucked under one arm. Turner, he said, you clean up well for a legend. He handed Eli an envelope stamped with the Air Force seal. Your appointment's official. Welcome back. Eli nodded slowly, the sound of engines vibrating through his chest. Didn't think I'd ever wear the name again. Holt grinned. You never stopped. The sky just waited for you to notice. As the jets performed their final pass, Caleb pointed, shouting over the roar. That one's yours, Dad. Eli looked up, following the silver streak slicing through the clouds. No, kid, he said softly. That one's ours. The applause rose, bright and loud. Avery stood a few feet away, watching with a quiet smile. Eli met her eyes, and for the first time since losing Nora, he didn't feel empty, just full. The last plane disappeared into the sun, its echo fading. Caleb tugged at his hand. Can we come back tomorrow? Eli squeezed his shoulder. Tomorrow, and the day after that. The sky's big enough for both of us. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the blinds of the small motel room, casting pale lines across the floor. Caleb was still asleep, his toy jet balanced on his chest like a tiny guardian. Eli sat at the edge of the bed with a cup of lukewarm coffee and the official letter from Dias Air Base in his hand. Civilian Consultant, Appointment Provisional. The words were simple, printed in the formal blue ink of government paper, but to him they carried the weight of a lifetime. He read them twice, almost afraid they'd disappear. Outside, trucks rolled past on the highway, the hum of engines blending with the morning wind. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope, then looked toward his son. Hey, Captain, he said softly. Wake-up call. Caleb stirred, hair sticking in all directions. Are we flying today, Dad? Eli smiled. Not today, but we might be helping people who do, like teachers. Exactly like that. They drove into town, stopping at the Silver Run Diner again. The same waitress from earlier spotted them and smiled. Back so soon, sugar? Eli nodded. Seems like we're becoming regulars. The bell over the door jingled. Avery Langford stepped in, dressed less like a corporate executive today and more like someone trying to blend into ordinary life jeans. A loose shirt, hair tied back. She walked over with an uncertain smile. Morning, Captain Turner. Eli's fine, he said. Titles are heavy enough without adding more. She slid into the booth. I heard Holt gave you the news. Yeah, Eli said. Consulting work. Half-time. Good pay. You deserve it, she said quietly. You gave this place its heart again. The waitress refilled their coffees, and for a while, silence settled between them, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable anymore. Avery broke it first. You know, when I first saw you on that flight, I thought you were just another passenger, angry at the world. Eli chuckled. Guess we both misjudged people that day. She smiled faintly. Maybe that's what the world does, teaches you who not to overlook. Brooks came in from outside, grease still on his sleeves, and gave Eli a firm pat on the back. Heard you're official now. Congratulations, man. Thanks, Eli said. Still feels strange. Brooks grinned. Strange is better than lost. Caleb leaned forward, whispering to Avery. My dad used to fly those really fast planes. He was the best. Avery's eyes softened. I know, sweetheart. And he still is, just flying a different kind of mission now. Eli looked at her, surprised by the gentleness in her voice. You've changed, he said. She laughed quietly. Maybe I just started listening. The conversation drifted toward the base. Toward the training sessions Holt wanted him to lead. Avery told him about the new recruits, how eager they were, how much they needed mentors who'd lived what the manuals couldn't teach. Eli listened, the thought of teaching both thrilling and humbling. Then Avery pulled something from her bag. A small, framed photograph. It showed Nora, Eli, and Holt standing beside their F-22 years ago, sunlight bright in their eyes. We found this in the archives, she said. Holt thought you should have it. Eli took it slowly. His thumb brushed the edge of the frame. That was the day before the final test flight. She looks proud, Avery said. She was, he whispered. So was I. Caleb leaned over, peering at the picture. That's Mom, right? Yeah, Eli said softly. That's her. Avery watched the two of them, her expression unreadable. You know, she said, I used to think strength meant control, keeping things perfect, never breaking. But maybe real strength looks more like this. Eli nodded. It's just showing up, even when you're scared. Outside, the sound of jet engines drifted faintly over the horizon, another day of flight drills beginning. Avery checked her watch and stood. I've got a meeting at the base, but I'll see you there tomorrow. Holt's expecting you at 9. I'll be there, Eli said. She paused at the door. One more thing, Eli. The next generation's watching you. Don't underestimate how much that matters. Eli watched her leave, then turned to Caleb, who was busy drawing jets on his napkin. The boy looked up, eyes bright. Can I come watch you teach? Someday, Eli said, smiling, when you're tall enough to reach the pedals. Caleb laughed, and the sound filled the diner, light and whole. Eli leaned back, looking out the window toward the open sky. For the first time, he didn't see loss there, just a horizon waiting to be crossed again. The next day, the morning air at DS carried that sharp metallic scent. Eli remembered the mix of jet fuel, asphalt, and sunlight. He stood beside Colonel Holt near Hangar 12, clipboard in hand, watching a group of young pilots gather around a simulator. Feels strange being back? Holt asked. Eli smiled faintly. Feels right, sir. Good. Holt said. They need someone who remembers the sky the way it used to sound. Eli's first session ran smoother than he expected. The cadets listened closely, respectful, curious. When he mentioned Nora's name, the room went still. She taught me that flying isn't about speed, he said quietly. It's about responsibility. After class, Avery met him outside, sunglasses in hand. You were incredible in there, she said. You have a way of making them believe. Eli shrugged. Just telling the truth. Sometimes that's all people need. Caleb came running from the viewing deck, waving a paper jet he'd folded himself. Dad, look! It can loop! He tossed it into the air, and it spiraled perfectly before landing in Eli's hands. He crouched beside his son, smiling. You know what that's called? Caleb shook his head. A perfect landing. Avery watched them for a moment, then said softly, Welcome home, Captain. Eli looked at the sky blue, endless, forgiving, and felt something settle deep inside him. For the first time in years, he wasn't chasing ghosts. He was teaching others how to fly toward tomorrow. Late September brought cooler mornings to Abilene, the kind that smelled faintly of dust and cedar. Eli stood by the window of their small apartment, coffee steaming in his hand, watching Caleb pack his school bag. The boy hummed softly, his toy jet now sharing shelf space with books and drawings of rockets. Life had settled into a rhythm again. Early mornings, base briefings, late dinners at the diner. Eli's consulting work had grown. He now ran tactical workshops twice a week. Teaching came naturally, but more than that, it gave him purpose. Every time he spoke about flight, he could almost feel Nora's presence beside him, silent but proud. That morning, a letter waited on the table, an envelope with the DS insignia and Holt's tidy handwriting. Turner, I think it's time you spoke to the new recruits about resilience and loss. You've earned that voice. He read it twice, then folded it carefully. It wasn't just another assignment. It was a sign that his story, the pain, the mistakes, the survival, had become something others could learn from. At the diner, Brooks waved from the counter. "Big talk coming up, huh?" "Looks that way," Eli said. Brooks grinned. "Don't forget to breathe. Heroes make lousy speakers when they hold their breath." A familiar voice came from behind Avery, carrying her usual tablet but dressed casually. "He's right," she said, sliding into the booth. "Just speak like you did the first time you told your son about flying." Eli raised a brow. "You were there for that?" She smiled. "Let's just say your story gets around." They shared coffee, the kind of quiet comfort that had grown between them without either naming it. Outside, the morning light painted the trucks gold as they passed. Avery placed a small package on the table. "From Holt," she said. "He thought you might want this before your speech." Eli opened it. Inside was his old flight badge, Hawk 7, restored and polished. The edges gleamed like new, but the tiny scratches still told their story. He traced it with his thumb. "Didn't think I'd see this again. Some things find their way back," Avery said softly. That evening, he sat at the kitchen table, writing his speech by hand. The words came slow at first, then flowed easier. He didn't write about glory or medals. He wrote about fear, about holding steady when everything inside you trembled, about the quiet strength it took to keep going for someone else. Caleb padded out of his room, sleepy-eyed. "You're still working?" "Just a little," Eli said, smiling. "Writing something important. About planes?" "About people," he said. "And why they matter more than the planes." The boy nodded solemnly and hugged him goodnight. When the apartment fell silent again, Eli read his letter aloud, his voice low but steady. The words filled the room like a prayer, an offering to the past and a promise to the future. He didn't notice the tears until they fell on the page. The next day, the briefing room at Dias was full. Young pilots sat straight-backed, waiting. Eli stood at the front, badge pinned to his jacket, Hawk 7 catching the light. He spoke simply, his voice calm. "Flying teaches you how to trust the air and how to fall. What matters isn't the fall itself, but how you rise, who you rise for." The room was silent except for the hum of the overhead lights. He told them about Nora, about fear, about finding purpose again through his son. No dramatics, just truth. When he finished, Holt stepped forward and shook his hand. "That," he said quietly, "is what these kids needed." Outside, Caleb was waiting by the car, waving proudly. "Dad, did they like your story?" Eli smiled, slipping the folded speech into his pocket. "Yeah, buddy, I think they did." As they drove home, the sunset washed the sky in gold and pink. For the first time in years, Eli felt weightless, not because he was flying, but because he'd finally landed where he was meant to be. Autumn crept across Abilene quietly, painting the trees along the old highway in soft shades of gold and rust. The air had that crisp smell of new beginnings, the kind that made people linger outside a little longer, just to feel it. Eli and Caleb stood by the fence near the airfield, watching a group of cadets taxi their jets down the runway. The engines roared, rattling the ground. But to Eli, it sounded like music now steady, alive, familiar. Caleb pointed, his voice bright. "Dad, that one's doing the roll you showed me." Eli laughed. "That's the Reaper roll, kiddo. Takes guts to pull it off right. And sakes, did you make that up?" "Once upon a time," he said, smiling. "Your mom used to say it looked like the sky was bowing back." The boy nodded thoughtfully, clutching his toy jet. "Do you miss flying?" Eli paused. "Every day. But I don't miss who I was back then." "Who are you now?" He looked down at him. "Your dad. That's enough for me." A car door shut behind them. Avery Langford approached, her heels crunching against the gravel, holding 2 coffee cups. "You still come here every week?" she asked. "Old habits die hard," Eli said. She handed him a cup. "Then here's to good habits." They stood together, watching the jets lift into the blue. "Holt's retiring next month," she said. "He wants you to take over the Veteran Outreach Program. Teach pilots how to land after the mission ends." Eli raised an eyebrow. "He's full of surprises." "You'll take it, won't you?" He smiled faintly. "I think I already have." The last jet disappeared into the clouds, leaving white trails curling across the sky. Caleb clapped, cheering. Avery turned to Eli. You ever think about writing it all down? Your story? Nora's? Everything? He looked out toward the horizon. Maybe one day. For him, he said, nodding toward Caleb. So he knows the sky's not just for flying, it's for finding your way back. As the last jet disappeared beyond the clouds, the wind carried only the echo of its engines. Eli stood beside Avery, his arm resting lightly on Caleb's shoulder. The boy's eyes followed the sky as though he could still see the plane up there, carving invisible trails. Avery smiled softly. He's got your focus. Eli shook his head. He's got his mother's courage. They walked back toward the truck as the sun sank behind the hangars. The air smelled of fuel and wild grass. That familiar mixture of endings and beginnings. Caleb ran ahead, laughing, his shadow stretching long across the tarmac. Avery turned to Eli. You know, she said, some people spend their lives trying to touch the sky. But you, she paused, you taught it how to forgive. Eli looked out at the horizon, glowing red and gold. Maybe, he said quietly. The sky was never the one that needed forgiving. Caleb called out, waving from the fence. Dad, come on. Race you to the truck. Eli grinned. You're on, Captain. Oh. They ran together through the fading light, laughter carrying over the quiet field. And for the first time in years, Eli Turner didn't feel haunted by what he'd lost, only grateful for what remained. The horizon stretched ahead, wide open, waiting. Sometimes, the sound of an airplane fading into the distance isn't just noise. It's a reminder that some journeys never truly end. Eli Turner's path began in guilt and silence, but it found its way home through forgiveness, love, and the laughter of a child who believed in him. The sky he once feared became a symbol of second chances, wide and endless, waiting for hearts brave enough to rise again. In every quiet morning, every shared cup of coffee, and every gentle word between father and son, there was redemption, not loud or grand, but steady like the hum of an old radio that still plays your favorite tune. Eli learned that healing doesn't come from outrunning the past. It comes from holding someone's hand and choosing to face tomorrow together. True love and redemption are not found in wealth or glory, but in the simple act of showing up for those who matter. Compassion has the quiet power to change a life, just as a porch light guides you home through the dark. Like a warm Sunday meal around a small-town kitchen table, kindness shared from the heart never fades. It nourishes everyone who touches it. So tonight, as you think about this story, maybe take a moment to remember someone you once forgave, or someone who forgave you. Those moments, small, human, imperfect, are what make a life worth living. If this story touched your heart, leave a 1-inch the comments. If you think it could be told better, press 0 and share your thoughts. Because every story, like every person, deserves a chance to grow brighter. And if it brought you a little peace tonight, then maybe, just maybe, that's the truest kind of flight.